Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Control+M Presents Plex session, our bi-weekly contribution to the Plex community to share our knowledge and make you all a little bit stronger at the same time. This week, our newest team member, Justyna Walker, will be talking about some of the packaging options in Plex. There are so many that we won't be able to get to them all, but we hope that she'll be able to whet your appetite to learn a little bit more. Justyna operates out of our brand new Canada office. We're delighted to announce that we're now serving Canadian customers. Justyna is a great great addition to our team. She's been using Plex for about 6 years now, and she's taken the same path here that everybody on the Control+M team took. We all started as Plex users, and we went into consulting because we were such huge fans of the Plex product. In addition to being a really strong Plex user, she's also a pretty cool person in general, and I'm not saying that just because she's from the Great White North, eh? So take it away, Justyna.
Thank you, Patty. Hey. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Control+M Presents Plex Packaging. As Patty already mentioned, the session today is being recorded and is going to be added to our YouTube channel later on this afternoon. We get a lot of questions from customers who want to do more than just tell operators what kind of containers to use. As you know, we work with both brand new Plex clients on implementation, as well as working with existing clients, helping them get better use out of Plex. Some clients want to cost their packaging in the parts. Others want to manage packaging inventory in different ways. Some have EDI packaging issues, and still others just aren't taking enough advantage of the packaging options Plex has to offer. Just an FYI, I will not be showing labels. It's just too overhead intense and it'll slow us down. Okay, so before I go to the first topic, I just wanted to let you know that today's presentation will be done in UX, however, with Classic in mind, meaning anything that is different in Classic from what I'm showing in UX, I will show you both. All right, so let's move on to packaging as bombs. Okay, so this one's a doozy. You may ask yourself, why put packaging on a bomb? You already have container types defined on your routings, so it may seem like double the work, but perhaps you want to track depletion of packaging or add packaging costs to your parts. Then you'll want to add it to your BOM. Patty?
Thanks, Justyna. Those of you who are not new to Control+M Solutions know that I do like to dive in and explain the accounting why. So when we make changes in Plex, I always like to let you know, here's what's going to happen in accounting and costing so that we don't solve one problem and make a mess in another area. We do get some client accountants and sales folks talking about why they want to cost packaging. And the reasons as well as the decisions vary. The big theoretical question is this: how much of an impact is the cost of packaging when compared to the cost of the parts that go into it? Considerations can include the treatment of supplies when they're first purchased and whether or not you want your cost of goods sold to reflect that as a direct cost versus an indirect one. Well, what do I mean by treatment of that? Well, if your supplies are expensed upon receipt, but then we don't handle the cost set up correctly through cost accounts, we could end up hopping back and forth between the income statement and the balance sheet, and we don't want that to happen. When we have these conversations, we have a number of things in mind, including how the newly calculated cost might impact revenue reporting, or gross profit, gross margin, financial statements in general, and we've got to consider GAAP requirements as well as the cultural appetite for change. Let's face it, the C-suite team of your board of directors may be relying on comparative years of data, and you posing a change to their cost structure might not bode well. In addition, we have to consider style in this choice as well. I once had a client tell me that his washers aren't worth any more to my customers because they're in a box, but we can't ship them just thrown in the back of the truck in shovelfuls either. So he viewed packaging as an expense item. But we also have another client who produces all customer supplied material, so costing for them is a huge part of their business. That's why they have made the decision to put packaging in as BOM items. Two different views of the exact same concept, but very different results, and both are correct. So In either case, we may also want to cost them but not plan for them. So we can, plan them but not cost them. We can simply teach the system to use the planning side but not the costing side. And why do I bring this up? Well, I don't want you to walk away from today's meeting thinking that if I need to cost them, I've got to plan for them, or vice versa. They're not married together. We can do planning without cost. And technically we could do cost without planning, but that's not really germane to what Justyna is showing. If you want to have that conversation, give me a call. Once we've talked to all the right people, operations, planning, sales, accounting, purchasing, then we can decide how to proceed. Like I always say, don't make changes like this without talking to accounting. In Plex, everything boils down to accounting. They see it all. And it's best if you can forewarn them so they don't come by a month later after something is happening asking why, or even worse, impacting their financials without leadership knowing it, and they come to you with questions. I hope that makes sense. And Justyna, back to you.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, so I will go ahead and switch over to Plex. In my example today, I will be showing you a finished good that uses both a supply and a part in their bill of material. The supply I've set up is a Gaylord, and the part is a pallet. Just like any supply or part, they are set up, the PO was cut, and they were already received into our system. Here, in this example right here, you can see that in our operation pack pieces, I have set up the Gaylord and the part as the bill of material. Our packaging configuration is 600 oil filters in a Gaylord on a pallet. So if I drill in to the BOM, you can see that I will need 0.0017. That is 1/600th of a Gaylord, and the same for the pallet, meaning that for our job of 600, I will use one of each. One thing as an FYI, this validate button right here, this validate button's purpose always was identify we need it on the BOM, cost it, plan for it, deplete it, but don't make the operator load it at the control panel. Great example, let's say you're making a product with multiple BOM components, but not all of them need to be traced by serial. This is a perfect fit. Unfortunately, in UX, it no longer works that way. There's an idea in the exchange to make this function the same way, and we'd love it if you voted up. All right, now, before we go to the control panel to see this in action, let's just have a quick look at our inventories for our pallet. So here, this is what I've done prior to this presentation. We have 5 pallets, and we have 10 Gaylords. So now I will go to the control panel and walk through what it would be like to run this. So I've ran, you notice there's 5 different operations. I already ran through them all. I just went to the most important, which is pack. So let's go ahead and produce. Also, you'll notice that 2 are already green. I already preloaded the oil filter from the previous operation. And the Gaylord is actually automatically loads because it's a supply. So that's the beauty of it. So all that's left is I have to load the pallet, because remember the pallet is set up as a part. So I'll go ahead and load it. Perfect, we're all good. And I will go ahead and produce our 600 oil filters. And container full. And just like that, everything was taken. So now let's go back to our inventories. So if we go back to inventory, refresh, you'll notice that our pallet is down to 4 now, and our supply should be down to 9, and there it is. So to summarize some of the differences between the parts versus supplies, parts, they're forward planning, using MRP, serialized. That's probably the best method for expandable packaging that have a significant cost and are using specific containers. Whereas supplies, there's the min-max planning, point in time, not serialized. This, I would probably say the supplies are most commonly used for common packaging, like a common box. However, both of these can be costed. And speaking of costing, that would be Patty.
Thanks, Justyna. Would you mind going to the next? Oh, you're already there. So here we're showing the part cost structure for the oil filter part. In Classic, it's called part cost structure. In UX, it's simply called cost structure. And that includes both the supply and the part on the pack pieces bill of material. Costing for supplies, whether it's actual costing or standard costing, is pretty simple. Just add a formula to your cost algorithm or set up your cost type for actual costing to get the numbers. I'd be happy to walk you through that if you get stuck. And as Justyna just showed, the depletion is very exact. Her BOM said 1/600th of a pallet for every oil filter that's been produced. Now, one thing to remember is this: when we produce in non-standard quantities, we may end up with a decimal of a container left. For example, let's say that Justyna is stamping these oil filters out of a coil of steel and she was using up the last bit of coil. And maybe she could only produce and pack 300 oil filters. She would be left with a half a Gaylord in her inventory. And we all know that you can't have a half a Gaylord. It's just not possible. We're going to put a half full container on our shelf. So since we know that that's not really true, we can either true those up just pretty easily with cycle counting. And you can get pretty creative if you're using standard costing by deploying costing in the third dimension. So we'd tell Plex, hey, when you see adjustment reason code, packaging true up, let's make sure we debit and credit the right accounts. So enough accounting, Justyna, back to you. I don't want everybody falling asleep on this call with too much accounting.
Thanks, Patty. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Process routings, approved containers. It's a simple one. Doesn't do any costing, no planning is needed. Mostly used to default of standard pack or ship quantities. These can be set up at the part level or the process routing. And the requirement is basically controlled by two settings. So make sure you check both of these settings out to be comfortable. There's the approved container type for process routing and the approved container type for part. Okay, so if we go to Plex for my approved container. Again, I've already pre-set up this container. So if we drill in, you set up your container, you've got your name, your description. In this, sorry, I went to the wrong spot. Let's try that again. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to go to set up an approved container. My apologies. So if I drill into the operation, you'll have the approved containers come up here. So this is where the two settings would have to come into play. You don't see this unless you have the settings turned on. So if I drill into here, I have to add a container. And in here, you basically select your container type. In this case, I'm going to select my bin. And the default container status. This here is one of the reasons why you would want to use the approved container to default the container status. Rather than creating an operation, you can create a container type that always puts the parts, let's say, on hold. One way you can use it is for a 3,000 piece new model initial inspection. And once the inspection is done, you simply change the default container status back to OK. Be very careful, however, when using this. If you were to automatically move to a status that can't be produced or shipped or isn't included in the MRP or PRP, you can really make a mess out of your configuration. So like Patty always says, test, test, test. A quick horror story courtesy of Patty. We had a client who used automatic status codes by location to control his quality hold inventory, kind of like this example. But he was also using the Plex cycle counting. So any unaccounted for containers would change location and because of his setup, would then change the status. So things were going off and on hold and nobody knew why. We dug through it and found out, but if his company had thoroughly tested and documented, they wouldn't have had all this drama. Okay, next is the standard pack quantity. This is another reason you may want to use this method to default a pack or ship quantity. This would be great for, let's say, if you have PLC integration or to help guide the employee to pack the quantities. There is some configuration that can also be done not to make that default. Then we've got your pack standard display. This, if you check that off, that will make the pack standard that we put in here. Let's say 50. If you check that off, that's going to show at the control panel. This is the default for the production. And then, of course, there is the default. So let's say you have more than one container type attached. You would default one of them and the other one is more or less a backup. Okay, so approved containers can also be tied to some customer EDI ASNs. It ensures correct container is tied to the serial, which in turn is then transmitted in the ASN. There's a lot more configuration that is required on this, so I will not go into any further detail on it, but if you do want any more assistance, just let us know and we'd be more than happy to help out. Okay, next is container tracking. Container tracking is great when you want to track returnable containers, be it customer owned or owned by you. It works best with approved container types. In the process routing, Plex will deplete the inventory of containers as you ship them and report it when you receive them. An email can also be sent to the contacts once the minimum has been reached. The key here is to ensure that each container type is attached as an approved container on the parts routing, so it gets properly consumed. So if we go back to Plex, this is where I had originally gone to by mistake, my apologies. This is the part that I have had set up for container tracking. This is a customer owned container that we want to track going back and forth. We have it checked off that it's a returnable. We entered in a tare weight here, which is going to come up in about 2 slides. Of course, we've got the customer code, customer part number. That is only if you don't name the your container the same as your customer. Of course, it's customer owned. The track, the container number of containers is important. So here is our minimum 50. Basically, if it reaches below 50, email notification is going to go out, and this is where you would put your email notification. It is recommended that you do your customer and the person looking after, so you can both know that this is happening. And down here is your standards: length, width, height, and down here is bill of material, which we'll get to later. And that is the returnable container setup. There is a slight difference. There is a slight difference that I'm going to show you between what I'm going to show you in UX, but there is a bit of a difference in Classic. There's the receive button versus edit, receive in UX. So I'll show you what I mean. So this is our setup. Here they are. And then, of course, if you want to receive in UX, you go to edit, receive, whereas in Classic, it's just called receive, but it is still in the same container type screen. Click on that. You select your returnable container and you put in how many you are receiving. Okay. And as you can see, it shows we now have 10 containers. So when we ship, that's going to deplete. When we return, you just type in how many you've received back, and then that's how that's controlled. And then, of course, there's the email notification that can be set up for when you reach your minimum. Okay. Container type bombs. This is a much less used function, but a useful one. It's for when you want to track the whole group package, such as your skid, your topper, your totes, your dunnage. Example would be if, let's say, you have a customer specific tote and you always ship those to the same customer and it's their skidfuls. By building this bill of material, every time we produce a part with that container type on the process routing, it will automatically consume the skid, totes, and hoppers. So what I mean by that is if we go back to this part, which is a returnable container, and I add, so we're already tracking this one, and I add to it the skid. So in this particular returnable and skid, we use one skid. Next, it was let's say yellow totes. Returnable. In this case, we use 72 totes on the skid. And we, of course, need a topper. And here is our bill of material. So we have it that this bin, this customer bin, for it, we use one skid, one topper, and 72 totes. You notice when I went into the add items to be able to pick it, this actually comes from your supply list. So you do have to set up the supply first in order to be able to pick it for here. All right, tare weights, to add or not to add is the question. This is maintained again at the container type form, and it's great for tracking package weights, variable weights, and for calculating shipper weights. Some people need to adjust these tare weights. For example, if you have an older steel tote that may have multiple paint layers or some oxidation, the totes might have unique weights. For example, a brand new one weighs 500 pounds, but a 10-year-old one has some welds, rust, and touch-up paints, and it weighs 505 pounds. Well, if that tote was full of small parts and you weight count, that 5 pounds can make a significant quantity difference. Same issue here with wooden pallets. They can become soaked with oil or have chunks missing. So some folks associate the expected tare weight with the container type, but allows edits for the operator, excuse me, my throat's getting dry, to update during weigh scale. We even had a client who spray painted the actual container weight on each of the metal totes for accuracy and speed when weigh counting. So to show you what I mean, if I go back to my inventory and let's pick a part. Okay, drill into the serial. Here, if you have a pizza box, 1,000 pieces, it takes into consideration, obviously, the pizza box, which it rounds it up to 1, and this is the weight for the parts. So if I were to go in and change that to, let's say, actually the spec bin that I had just set up, that weighs 256 pounds, and apply it, there we go. You can see the significant change. So this, especially when you're trying to build shippers, this comes in handy significantly when you're trying to maximize the space on a trailer. All right. Pack container to boxes. This is a great fast process that can be used in 2 different ways. The first one is when you just want to take a big tote of parts and break it down into smaller containers with your own internal labels. The second one is you can pack containers right to a shipper, giving you the right labels and loading the shipper at the exact same time. So in this example, I will load it. Okay, so I have configured our packed container, packed shipper right here, but the option is also available to pack to a release or simply to just pack. Just because our packed container to boxes is set up to a load to a shipper, you do not have to do that. Example, if you are packing 1,000 boxes of 1,000 washers each, you don't know who is going to buy them. You don't have the pack. You don't have to pack to a shipper. You can just pack it with a regular finished good for your inventory. But if you don't see this on your screen, you can configure it by enabling the setting called Pack to Shipper Display. As always, we recommend testing. Make sure the correct customer finished good label shows up when you're loading to the correct release. Also consider your users when doing this. If you ask an operator to pack container to boxes, you'll have to make sure you tell them what order they are packing to so they don't pick the wrong one. So before I show you how this works, Patty has informed me that there is a way to actually spawn this directly onto the control panel. Patty, did you want to? Thank you.
Sure. I don't know if you noticed or not, but you can spawn pack container to boxes right from the control panel. We've got a screenshot on the left here from a client who did a little bit of glossarization that made a lot of sense to their users. Normally it says pack container to boxes, but for their users, what does it do? It makes custom labels. I wanted to show that glossarization here because if you do this setup, which is super easy. All you do is enable the pack to box flag on your operation type and then associate that operation type with an operation. It's easy to do, but you're going to see different words here. Normally, I'm not a big fan of glossarization because it can make conversations with other Plex customers a bit more challenging, but this is the most useful one I've ever seen, or one of the most useful one I've ever seen, because it conveys to the operators doing the work exactly what they're doing. Do I pack to my normal labels, or do I pack to my customer labels? And it gives you the functionality of control panel with combined with the functionality of pack container to boxes. So back to you, Justyna.
Thank you. Okay, so I will go back to Plex and walk through the pack container to boxes. So as you noticed, I had originally scanned my cereal that I will be working with, which is my quantity of 3555, packed to a shipper. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the shipper that's available. And the shipper calls for 2,000 pieces. So obviously I have more parts than I need. And I am going to pack them at 4 boxes of 500. So 4 boxes at 500. And the remainder, 1555, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, just leave those together. You can select a container type. I am going to leave it at bin. And I want 1 label per box. Here you could do 2 labels per box. Sometimes they want it on both sides of the box. So that's up to you. And down here, you can you have 3 options. You have pack loose containers. Basically, I just want my 4 labels. You have build a master unit with these boxes. So you're going to have 4 box labels plus a master unit, or you can add it to a pre-existing master unit. For my example, I'm just going to use loose boxes. And I click OK. And that's it. My labels would have printed at this point, and I can go ahead and label my product. All right, so last but definitely not least is some customer additional charges by container type. So let's say you use customer owned packaging and now you're out. So what do? You'll either miss your shipments, but probably not, and you'll just use some expandable boxes. Boxes that add up in costs, and I'm sure you don't want that cost coming out of your pocket. So we could always charge the customer back. So in this example, if I go to the customer master pricing, here's our customer. I already have a master price file that's set up, and we're out of packaging for the oil filters. So I'm going to go ahead and use expandable packaging. So if I drill into here and I go into the price for that part, we have the price components. Here you can actually set up for, this price component can do other things as well. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we're going to focus on a container. What kind of container? Well, obviously I'm going to be using box. How much does a box cost? Let's say it costs 50 cents a box. And then we use it per part. And then do we invoice, do we not invoice? And then of course, do we want a separate invoice? And then we okay it. So this will go ahead and update our orders. So now this is going to be added to their price for the extra packaging that we are using. Now, what I just showed you is the customer master price. That is just the easiest way to see it and to explain it. But you can do this with just about any customer pricing method. It's not just for master price. So I hope this has been helpful. Let's open up to the floor to questions, and maybe you can share some of your creative ideas or ask questions about what you've seen. Please remember that without access to your system and the ability to dig in and diagnose, we can't always answer your questions on the fly. There are millions of ways to configure Plex, which makes it impossible to know which options you're using and to be able to answer correctly without access. However, we will definitely do our best.
Don't forget to unmute yourself if you've got a question, since we've got everybody muted. Russ, I saw you had a question when using pack-to-boxes, will it reprint a label with a new quantity? Yep, I think there's a setting for that. So I will check and email you back directly on that one.
It's all right. I don't really use that. So it just happened to come to mind that, for example, what I was thinking about was the split container screen. The split container screen, when you split, it gives you an option of print the labels or don't print the labels. And I didn't see that on this screen. I give you that option. That's kind of why I was asking it. And I didn't see where it said that it would print the label from the original container with the quantity being changed.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Annie, I have a question regarding instructions and how an operator knows. For example, we have parts that if it goes to this customer, it's in a returnable. If it goes to this customer, it's in a box. If it goes to this customer, it's in a box with a bag. And relaying that to the operator, what's the best method?
Justyna, do you want to dive in on this one? I know what I would recommend, but I'll let you try.
Would it be the customer part specific with the approved containers on the part?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do that, Annie, to be honest with you. Is it packaged on the line or is it packaged separately?
It's strictly a packaging app, so that's all they do is pack parts. And they typically, you know, we can't pack ahead typically can't pack ahead because, you know, customer demand fluctuates and we'd hate to get it on cardboard only to find out now we got to transfer it into returnables. And we do have it on the process routing with instructions, so to speak, in the job app. But I just wondered if there was a better way.
The cleanest way that I have discovered to do this, in particular if it's a separate pack operation, is to create different part numbers for those different customer parts and then associate the correct part number with that. So for example, if you are stamping out washers and they're stamped out of regular steel, and some people buy the regular steel ones, and some people have to have them dipped in glitter, and other people have to have them rolled in oats. You know, I'm just being silly because I don't know what you guys are doing. It could be chrome, it could be gold dipped, whatever. We'll say the gold dipped washer then uses the plain washer as a bill of material, And then we can gain efficiencies by making great big jobs of the plain washer and then smaller jobs for packaging. Or even, you know, using pack container to boxes, we don't even have to create a job. We can just say, okay, this total of 1 million washers gets broken down, sent to subcontractor for, you know, chrome dipping if we need it, and then package that way. Or if it's just a packaging spec, run it through pack container to boxes in the right sizes. And I would use the operation then from the separate part number. You can get fancy, but the issue always is the one you're bringing up, Annie, which is, okay, how do I tell my operators what to do? Because the cost of them doing the wrong thing is usually somewhat significant.
Correct.
Great question. Probably not an answer you loved, but it's the one we found works the best when it comes to physically getting it done. Any other questions? Okay, Justyna, thank you very much for sharing all this information. I have to admit that Justyna showed 2 concepts that I recently learned about in the past like 15 months, and I've been working with Plex since 2007. And I know that there's many, many options for packaging we didn't have time to cover in this session. We'd be happy to do a deeper dive if you've got specific questions on this topic or just want to know anything more about the methods that Justyna has shown. Justyna, can you hit the next slide? Our next session is going to be held in 2 weeks. I'm going to be presenting how some of the fields in the part master and in the process routing can impact MRP recommendations. We get a lot of questions from customers who are mystified by those recommendations. And I can promise you that I have never found a recommendation quantity in MRP that I couldn't trace back to some data. And I've been doing this, like I said, for 13 years. This next session is going to take you through a step-by-step view of how fields like min inventory, min purchase, standard job quantities can all impact MRP. So if you use the MRP recommendations and you sometimes get confused by what it's showing you, or if you aren't using MRP recommendations because you maybe don't understand or trust the numbers, please join us. It's going to give you a good level of comfort with MRP. So thank you very much for joining us. And thanks, Justyna, for sharing all this great information with the audience. And thank you, Heidi, for adding that new screen. I can't wait to check it out. We believe that sharing what we all know makes everyone in the community stronger. And we're so grateful to you for spending part of your busy day with us. We'd like to ask you to remember our YouTube channel. It's in everybody who works at Control+M's signature. So please take a minute or 2 out there to like our videos. Those thumbs up mean a lot to us. So even if you watched it live, we appreciate the props. So until 2 weeks from now, stay safe and healthy and take care of yourselves and your companies. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job,
Thanks,
Justyna.
Thank you.
Thanks.